We're here to talk about insights for ArcGIS. And this is an introductory session, so we're not going to get too deep. We're going to get a little deep, maybe a little more.
No.
All right, we'll find out. Depends on the crowd.
They can push us for more.
Yeah, if you guys want to push. All right? Otherwise, what we're here to talk about is insights for ArcGIS. We're going to get into a bunch of different things to kind of give you an overview of it. We do also have an advanced session, which we go into the dirty details. What's behind the magic curtain, what's in front of the curtain, all that stuff. But for this one right here, this will give you a good foundation to understand what Insights is, what we're about, and what we're capable of doing. And we have a whiz-bang presentation that really showcases some of the capabilities of Insights, and it's in all of its simplicity.
You're building it up again.
Yes, I'm building it up again. Sorry.
All right.
But we only have like an hour and 15, I think, total together, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So in terms of the topics that we're going to specifically talk about, we were thinking about this like for weeks, and we finally came up with the following things that we want to make sure we cover from the perspective of some of the users and some of the questions that we've been getting. So the first thing is, I've never seen it. How many folks have never seen it? Okay, so this is your first go-around with it, right? All right, good. This is the place for you. Then we said, okay, we've seen it, but what does it really do? All right, we're going to get into that too. We're going to get into some of those details. Seen it, we use it, so what's new? Okay, that's part of the talk, so we're still doing good. Seen it, but I just don't believe it. I mean, come on. We actually got these questions. It was quite amazing. It was fun. So we're going to impress you today, hopefully.
We hope, yeah.
There, I'm building it up again.
I know, exactly.
Yeah, okay,
You just make me nervous when you do that.
Yes, well, that's okay. We've been working together for far too long. Then people say, I've seen it, I use it, but where is it going? So we want to make sure you understand where it is going, what the roadmap is, how we work, and where our focus is, if you will. Okay, seen it, use it. Is Esri going to keep this one? Really? Yes, we're going to keep this one. We have a huge team behind it. We have a bunch of passionate, not only software engineers, but subject matter experts, quality engineers, program managers, product team. I mean, it's out of this world. So yes, we're going to get into that as well. So let's get right into it. Insights for ArcGIS. This is a capability that we extended into ArcGIS to enable analysis. Yes, I didn't prefix it with spatial analysis or anything like that, because quite honestly, it's about analysis. It's about enabling you to ask questions of your data, get answers, and oh yeah, an answer may lead to many more questions, many more answers. So it's iterative as well. We want you to understand the full power of spatial analysis, but we don't require you to be a GIS expert. It's data, and I need to work with all kinds of data. Strings, numbers, date, time. Oh yeah, spatial. The problem is most people find spatial to be kind of special. Well, we know it's special, but a lot of people don't. So we don't treat spatial as special. So with Insights, we want to explore that possibility. And the way we do this is visually and intuitively. It enables both exploration and iteration in a very easy-to-use experience. We combine analysis and the results of that analysis through visualizations on cards, but the cards are not about visualizing your data. Yes, it has a visualization, but it's more than that. We're going to get some details on that in just a little bit. Ultimately, all these cards are very linked and responsive to each other. So I can start with a spatial piece of information, bring that onto the page. It draws right away on a card. We get it. But then I have another piece of information. Let's say it's coming from Excel, SQL Server, Oracle, HANA, a NoSQL source, who knows? But it's non-spatial. Guess what? It's still analysis. I still should be able to work with it. But realizing the power of spatial against that tabular data should be as easy. So Insights enables some of those things too. Ultimately, we want you to be able to understand your data, work with your data regardless of where it's at, through the process of analysis, and that begins with a question leading to ultimately to answers. One of the things about the process of understanding your data is I always got a piece of paper and a pencil. I'm writing down notes. What did I just do? Where am I going? What kind of a thing did I just come upon, right? Well, another thing with this capability, this product that we've introduced, is it records everything. Keeping in mind it's very visual, it's very intuitive, it's exploratory, it's iterative. Everything has to be very friendly as well, right? That's the concept of intuitive. So everything's friendly. If I start something, I can undo it. And I can redo it if I wanted it back. But that has to be really quick. In other words, drag, drop, see something, oops, I messed that up, I want to start over. I shouldn't have to pay the cost. All that is built into this experience. And ultimately, recording that represents a model. We'll get into those details in a minute. So, touched on a little bit of the data. We work with not only spatial data, but tabular data from a number of different sources. You work with relational data systems. Out of the box, we support Oracle, SQL Server, SAP HANA, as well as Teradata. We can extend that. We'll talk a little bit about that in the advanced session, but there is a way to extend the data sources. We can work with tabular data and spatial data. And if your spatial information contains more than one geo-reference, we call those geodimensions, you can have multiple shapes per data set. You can think of a layer with multiple shape columns. We can do that inside of Insights, and we can enable that through a very easy mechanism. Ultimately, we want you to be able to combine data from anywhere and begin working with it without having to stress on getting that data in. When we do add that data from all these different sources, we abstract away the concept of where it came from. We want to treat all data sets the same. The same type of analysis should happen with SQL Server and an ArcGIS feature layer. It doesn't matter. All of that comes in, and regardless, table, a view, the view may have some R scripts behind it running as a stored procedure through SQL Server. We can do that. We can execute that. All of that comes in. We treat it all the same. Ultimately, when we do bring that in, you're not just working at the layer level as in traditional ArcGIS. You're working with the fields themselves. We expose everything, and when we do, we interrogate that data behind the scenes. We understand what the field's role may be. In other words, we identify geodimensions, temporal dimensions. We understand the categorical information, strings, as well as the quantitative information, numbers, measures. We bring all that in and we identify a role such that you as a user, when you want to work with that, you drag that field over onto the page, we know exactly what to do with it. So if I'm working with two measures, I drag that over, I want to create a chart. We assume, based on the roles of the fields, that you want to understand a logical relationship between those two fields. Scatter plot is shown. If I'm dragging a dimension over, I want to draw a chart. It's a bar chart. If I have a map and I drag a dimension over there, it'll style using smart mapping capabilities the map based on what you want to look at. So it's really that kind of a concept. The roles help us hide some of that technological complexity and allow it to fade away in the background. You should focus on the analysis, not on the technology, or relearn the way you think. A lot of that is, I hate to use the architecture phrase, speed of thought. If you can see it, you should be able to do it. Imagine, drag, drop, go for a cup of coffee, come back, it might be done. That doesn't work. Drag, drop, do something, drag, drop, do something else. That does work. If you're thinking through, you want this tool to operate at your speed, not at its speed. And that's the thing right there. We also recognize that, I don't know about you guys heard this phrase, data wrangling? Okay. It's about 70 to 80% of all analysis process. You start with cleaning the data, cleansing the data, getting it to a place where I can start asking it questions. Well, we tried to work some of that concept into Insights so you can bring in the raw table and begin working with it almost immediately. In the process, you discover what's wrong with your data. And then you can start creating additional calculations against that, expressions against that to generate fields or abstract away the things that you don't want, filter things away. But you can continue on. All the while, we're creating transient, or what we call result layers, temporary data sets behind the scenes so that you can continue working with it at your speed. And when we do this, we really don't go back to the origin data set because we're not what they call hoovering that data out of your data source into ours. We're working with it at the location, so it's not actually being copied. Right? We don't mess with your schema. Your database stays your database. If it's Excel, yeah, well, it's a flat file. We copy that up, and we create a table out of it in our hosted data server, our hosted data store. We continue doing that. One of the things about Insights is convenience. We want to add as much convenience for your purposes to perform analysis as is possible, such as this slide right here. We call it creating relationships, ultimately joins. I want to be able to, I see a layer 1 and a layer 2. Hey, wait a minute, they're related. Or maybe the result of my analysis, I created a couple of pivot tables and those data sets are related. I want to create a new information product and go from there. I should be able to do that on the fly without having to stop my work, go down to the other department, talk to a DBA, create a view for me so I can do some other things. Should be able to do that right away. Again, the process here is to simplify the process in which you can perform your analysis and eliminate that technology. Get the technology in the background so you can focus on your work. Data is king. Without it, you can't do your analysis. As you well know, ArcGIS has this thing known as the Living Atlas. A curated set of content both from Esri and authoritative sources from around the world that we brought together in one place. That Living Atlas data is available for your needs. We make it readily available so you can point and click, add it in, and start working with it directly from within Insights. Of course, analysis. Now that you've got the data, what can you do with it? Well, it's about interactivity. If I see it, I should be able to touch it and do something with it. So the interface itself is very minimalistic. You don't have a bunch of menus, ribbons, toolbars, buttons, parameters that you got to enter. We try to create these intelligent defaults behind the scenes based on empirical processing and fact. You know, it's all based on reality, not based on what we think should happen, but based on true analysis workflows from the team actually going out in the field. Actually, Linda and I have been on a road trip for the past year and a half, I think, constantly going out there and talking to people. One of the mantras behind Insights has been listen, learn, and observe. And then once you understand whatever it is we want to do, we crawl, walk, and then run. The interactive nature of Insights is just simple. But don't underestimate the power of simple. Everything is drag and drop friendly, 3 clicks or less, and not very tool-centric. It should just, again, think speed of thought. Very fluid motions to perform your analysis. But of course, we recognize that sometimes you just know what you want, and you just want to get to it. So we don't try to eliminate all that, we enable it. On the map card, for example, we have this action button. And the action button enables you quick access to the tools that you need. Not only the spatial tools, but other tools as well. For instance, there's this other tab called Find Answers. For the folks out there that know GIS, it's simple. I just want to do a drive time analysis, or I want to create a density surface. You guys know what you're doing, go off and do it. But a lot of folks don't know what those things are. So these Find Answers provide us a way of, hey, how is this data distributed? Click it, and it'll give you the options available for you. Some of those are spatial capabilities, but some are not. Sometimes the histogram works just as well. Other times, you want to see it on a map. So, all the above is built into Insights. Of course, I mentioned as you're iterating through and you're performing your analysis, sometimes a piece of paper and pencil doesn't really work. If you've seen my writing, you'd understand. It's a lot of chicken scratch, a lot of notes, a lot of sticky pads, and I get more sticky notes up on my monitor depending on the size of my monitor. What Insights does is records every step of the way. every step of the way. So behind the scenes, we're going to show you this in real time here in just a minute. From scratch, right?
Yep.
Cool. We're going to do it all from scratch, so it's live. So if the internet fails us, it's not our fault. But in fact, that model is not only designed to record your work, but let's say that you discovered a pattern to, or a workflow that actually makes sense, and you want to repeat that based on a new set of data. You can save that model as a template, bring it into a new page or a new workbook, rehydrate it with the additional data set or a filtered data set based on a date range or whatever, and re-execute it, and everything downstream then becomes alive. It just starts executing that model, and away you go. Now you've got your page ready to go, from which you can take those results, share it, create a story map, do with it what you will. Embed it in a website, whatever you want to do. Speaking of sharing. You know, I had this saying when we first started out, data is very, very important, but it's not as important as the answers it provides or the stories that it tells. Once you have those answers, you want to tell those stories, and we want to make it as easy as possible to do that. Keeping in mind that Insights was just released in December, it's only 6 months old. We still have a long way to go on this, but you can share the results of your work. You can share the entire workbook. You can share a specific page with the results that you are interested in directly. And then you can take that page, you can embed it directly inside of a website or a story map or whatever else, or just have it as an item in your portal so that anyone can review that page. And the interesting thing, that model goes with it, so they can flip over to the model to understand exactly how you came to those results. All that is part of sharing. But more importantly, those temporary data sets that you create as part of your analysis can also be shared out. During the analysis process, it's all contained within the workbook. It doesn't leave the workbook. When I talk a little bit about the architecture behind the scenes in just a little bit, you'll see that it's really not in the workbook itself. It's a very thin client. All the heavy lifting goes on behind the scenes. But you can share those temporary data sets and create new information products from which you can do other things throughout your organization with other ArcGIS bits. Still don't believe it? Okay. This is where I'm going to turn it over to Linda and have her do some stuff.
All right, so we've already seen a little bit about the spatial analysis functionality that we have in there. So we've spent a lot of time making sure that there are different ways of visualizing your data. Using geographic data, we're used to sort of seeing things on a map, so we're obviously extended that to charts and tables, but it's important we remember that this is about analysis. There's a lot of analysis tools in there. We've kept it fairly minimal, so there aren't a lot of tools. We keep it pretty clean in terms of the UI, but there is a lot of functionality in there. So some of the tools, take for example the buffers. Within the buffer tool we have a straight line distance buffer, we have drive time buffers, we have driving distance buffers. So there's a lot of kind of hidden things in there. So there's more than you initially see, and then there's a lot of other ways in which we sort of manage the data without specifically using a tool. So I think that's kind of one thing I wanted to mention, that although you don't see a whole lot of tools, there is a lot of functionality in there, and you are able to answer kind of the everyday, the key analysis that we often do, and certainly to understand the type of data that you're working with. So this is the actual spatial tools we have in there. We have spatial filters, spatial aggregation, buffers I've already mentioned. We can enrich the data, so we have that ability to connect and add in all sorts of demographic and other variables to locational data that you have. We can create density surfaces, and we can also find nearest. And again, that's both drive time, driving distance, and straight line distances. So obviously, to do any kind of analysis, we need the functionality to have selections and filters in there. So of course we can do that. As you would expect in ArcGIS, anything that we have selected, that's what the analysis is run on. So it's run on the selection set that you have. It's very important that we work with the concept of the cards that we have. So there's multiple different ways of visualizing that data. Everything interacts with each other. So that's one way you can automatically start to filter and select that data. because things are interacting between. So I see something in a table, so imagine I want to know an exact value. The best way to see exact values is in a table rather than on a map. So I'm going to use the table to find that value, but I want to see where it is. I click on the table, the interactivity is going to show me where it is on the map. So there's lots of it's not hidden, but different ways of thinking about how to use these analysis tools. So we can do the attribute filters just as you'd expect on the data pane. We can also do everything that we do in terms of filtering and selections on the card as well. Now the difference we have there is in the data pane, as we have like the table of contents within ArcMap, anything that you filter there is affecting the entire data set. So imagine you want to reduce the amount of data you're doing your analysis with. You can filter out with your attributes in the data pane. Then you're going to be working with a subset of the data from there on. But if you want to have comparisons, you want to compare things side by side, a great reason why you'd be doing insights. You've got the cards, you can see the two views side by side. You want to compare data from 2000 to 2001, then you'd be filtering on the card. Because I don't want to affect my entire data set, I just want to affect that view that I'm looking at. So I filter on one card to 2000, on another card to 2001. And there I'm working side by side between the two cards. So that's why we have the repetition between what we see in the data pane in terms of filtering and selection and what we have on the cards. So these are just the different ways we filter, obviously depending on whether it's an attribute, whether it's a categorical variable, then we will be selecting one by one. Again, you don't have to click each thing individually. You can click one at the top, hold down the shift key, click the bottom one, and it will select everything in between. So there's lots of little things that you see in there that are much easier to use than it might initially look. So the way we visualize the data, I've already started to talk a little bit about the cards. We have 3 different types of cards that we work with. So we work with maps, charts, and tables. So the idea is that we work with the actual attributes of your data. So when we're doing any analysis, we don't want to ask a question of the layer. So that's giving us, traditionally in ArcGIS, where something is. Behind the where it is all the information that's at that location. So we've kind of shifted that up a little bit because we want to actually ask questions of the data values, and of course we want to know where it is. We want to work spatially. That affects everything we do. But what we're doing is asking questions of the actual data, the actual attribute that we is. So what country is it? So I'm working with that attribute that we're exposing in the data pane rather than the layer, and then drilling down into what's at that location. So in terms of what kind of map types do we support? Well, we're talking about analysis. We do all analysis within Insights, so we're talking about thematic mapping. The results of our analysis is giving us a theme that we're visualizing. So that's going to be a busy map. It's going to show us the different values by the locations or whatever it is we're doing the analysis on. So really the recommendation there is that you use a light or a dark grey base map, because what you're interested in is the values on top. That's what you're analysing. The base map is giving you an idea of where things are, but you don't want that to dominate your map too much. So we can change the base maps. You can change the base map to any type you want within Insights. If you click on one map, it will change just the base map on that card. If you have none of the cards selected, it will change all of the base maps on that page. But the idea there is that you could maybe, if you want to see imagery data, you could have that in one card, and you can have your busy thematic map next door in another card, and you can see that information side by side. At the moment, we only work with vector data. So we only work with points, lines, and polygons. We're going to be doing raster later on. So we do support all the different symbol types. So we're using smart mapping behind the scenes. Obviously, we rescaled it slightly. We're working with slightly smaller cards. You can make them bigger, but just so as you know, the default will be slightly smaller than you see on the online maps. So these are just all the different ways that you can visualize your data. We thought hard about the defaults that you get. So if you're using values by area, you will get a graduated symbol. You will get unique styles if you're using categorical variables. But you can change all of these things. It's your data. We're just going with sensible defaults so you don't make mistakes, or somebody doesn't make mistakes who doesn't know exactly what they're doing. In terms of the charts, so I say we've introduced a lot of chart types. So for categorical variables, for qualitative data, the default will be a bar graph. So that's going to allow you to see the data where there's broad differences between the different values. So if you drag any category across, it will automatically do the count of that category. You can change that statistic to the minimum, maximum, average, or sum of that variable. Tree map, much the same as a bar graph, a different way of visualizing that data. It will kind of show you all of the data, so it's a little bit more of the part to the whole. There are some cases where a tree map will show the data much clearer. The default will be the bar graph, but you can always change it to a tree map. A bubble chart, again, if you have a single categorical variable, you can change it to a bubble chart. Bubble charts can be very, very useful if you have an awful lot of categories. With a bar graph, you're not going to see all of those bars. You lose the information. With a bubble chart, you won't be able to pull out the actual values, but if you have lots of very small categories and maybe a few large ones, then a bubble chart is a good thing to show it with. If you have 3 variables, so if you have 3 numeric variables, essentially a scatter plot, and you have another numeric variable that you want to show the value of, then we will also produce a bubble chart there. So that's 3 numeric variables to produce that type of bubble chart. Donut charts, I never enjoy talking about. I don't like them.
Sorry.
But they're in there.
I don't know many statisticians that like donut charts.
No. If you do want to use a donut chart, it must represent everything. You're showing the proportions of everything. If you have more than about 8 categories, you're not going to see it. If your categories are much the same size, no one can tell the difference between them. There are cases when they're useful to use, but with caution, please. That's it. I'll move on. A chord diagram, they're wonderful. A chord diagram allows us to show interrelationships between categories. So they're very useful. Normally, when we're looking at relationships between 2 variables, we're talking about numeric variables. We're talking about scatter plots. But what if you have categories? What if somebody's put size in and it's small, medium, and large? Well, we still want to understand that. This is where something like a chord diagram will come in. Chord diagrams, be a little bit careful if you have too many categories. It gets really cluttered and you lose all of that information. If we have numeric variables, you drag a single numeric variable across, you'll get a histogram. We will be showing the distribution of that data. That's going to enable you to understand the value that you have. We have a lot of statistics that we've added onto that to see whether, for example, it's normally distributed. A lot of statistics will assume that your data is normally distributed. Take kriging, take regression, it's an assumption of those statistics. First thing you'll need to know is it normally distributed? So we overlay that normal distribution curve. We also give you the skewness and kurtosis on the back of the card. So that's another thing. You can flip the cards over and we give you the statistics there to help you understand what you're looking at. Scatter plots, I've mentioned a lot already, allow you to see the relationships between 2 numeric variables. We also allow you to overplot the statistics, the trend on there, to see whether it's linear, exponential, polynomial relationships within there. Box plot, similar to a histogram in the sense that it's giving you the distribution of your data. Where the box plot becomes very useful if you have a number of different categories that you want to see the distribution of that data of, and you want to compare it side by side. So you'll be able to see that on the box plot. The other great thing about the box plot, often we want to see outliers. We want to see where our data is particularly statistically different from somewhere else. We pull out the outliers on there. Remember, everything is linked. So if you click on your outlier on any of those bar charts, it's going to pull it out either on the table if you want the values, or on the map if you want to see where those are, and then you can shift your analysis into just exploring those outliers if that's what you're interested in. Line graphs is the default setting for if you drag across a date field. A line graph should be used for continuous data, so that's the only time you will see one by default. If you have continuous data, you can obviously change it to a line graph. Data clock, another useful thing if you're looking at temporal data. So this is actually going to find the frequencies within a circular graph. It's counting up the frequency within each one of those little cells that you will see. Same for a heat chart, that's doing it in a matrix. So if you want to see how many events there are, let's say, by space and time, you can imagine that matrix is then filling out the frequency within each one of those cells. So then you can see spatially and temporally whether something is increasing or decreasing amongst a lot of different locations. Summary tables are a very important thing within Insights. So this is where we can allow you to do a little bit of the data management without you having to run a lot of tools. Calculate summary statistics, doing frequencies. We can do all of that with the simple summary table. Essentially what it is a pivot table. So if you take across a category, we will instantly do the count for you of that category. If you take across a category and a number, we will calculate the sum, the mean, the max, whatever it is you're interested in for that numeric variable. So I think we build out this so we can see, in this case I've just dragged across a numeric variable, it's going to give me a total. So that's the quick way to find what there is of that number, what's the total. So here I've just dragged across the category and it's given me the count for that category. If I drag across two categories, then we will also do the count or a statistic for a numeric variable for those two categories. So those summary tables are ways that you can actually pivot that data and create new data sets with that. Sorry. So those summary tables are different to attribute tables. That's one of our card types. But we do have attribute tables, of course. So that's what we call a data table. That's where you can access all the data in your data set. That's where you can do your field calculation. So you can add another field, do a calculation. We have lots of different functions that we've added in there. So we have 10 string functions, 10 numeric, 4 date, and 3 logical, the and, if, and or. So there's some pretty powerful functionality there in terms of how you can manipulate the data that you've brought in. So I talked about using the summary tables, how you can kind of pivot your data, you're creating new data sets. So what happens in Insights is every time you run any kind of analysis, and that's a broad description of the word analysis. So I create a bar graph. That's actually aggregating my data into a different form. I'm seeing a sum by my category. That's actually a new way of seeing that data that I didn't have before. So in that case, we create a new result there. We give you a new data set in your data pane that's stored within the workbook that you can reuse if you want that view of that data. So you want us to use that data again. So imagine you've pivoted your data by 2 categories and multiple different numeric fields. That's a whole new data set. That might be what you want to share with someone else or what you want to use in another analysis. You can share that back or you can use it directly as it is within Insights. And of course you can join that. So we've already seen the create relationships. You can join that back to other data sets and start to work with that as a new kind of form of data set. And Art's already mentioned how we can work with multiple different shape fields. So imagine you're bringing in some data that you have at points, but you also want to do a lot of analysis at zip code. You could geocode it by zip code. You could join that up with something else that has another data set that has zip code in. And then you will have 2 shape fields within that data set, one for the points where you had it initially, one for zip codes, and depending on which shape you drag across will depend on how you visualize that data and how you can work with that data.
This
So
fun
I'm
part.
going to keep going.
Yes.
I get a lot of talking.
We're going to make Linda work today. She's actually going to do the demo.
Stop rubbing your hands. It makes me feel like it's going to get harder. Okay, so I don't have a mouse. No. Okay, so I'm going to start a new workbook. So the idea of when we work within Insights, we work within workbooks. You can store all of that information within that workbook, and you can kind of break down your analysis by pages. So I'm going to bring in some data here. Actually, I'm going to go through the data we have. So we work within Enterprise. So this is connected to my portal. So all the data that I already have on my portal, obviously I can already see. So this is my content. I shared that up there. I haven't shared that with anyone else. It's my individual data. I also have a couple of groups, or I did have some groups, that I've shared some data to. You can have groups you share data to. You can have an organization, so you can share within the organization. We've mentioned how we have the Living Atlas.
Are you connected?
Am I connected to the internet? Just checking I'm connected to the internet. Yes, I am.
Okay.
All right.
There
There
we
you
go.
go. It was just slow. So, I have some groups now. I'm alive. I have my organization. I have the Living Atlas content. These are the demographic boundaries that we make available. So this is data that we make available. It's essentially census data for over about 120 countries. It saves you having to go out and find things like census block routes, census tracts, whatever you're interested for your own country. When you just want to see something like, I want to see it by those areas, how many there are, it saves you going to find all that data. It's just there. You can drag and drop data in directly from Excel or CSV. If you have multiple different tabs in your Excel workbooks, you can bring them all in, or you can select which ones you want to bring in. We can also connect directly to databases. So you can work directly against Oracle, SQL Server, SAP HANA, Teradata, and we will work in those native data types against your data. So let's bring in some data. I'm going to bring in some data on global terrorism. So this is data collected by the University of Maryland. So it's spatial data. It's first thing it's going to do is map it. So now we're visualizing this data on a card. But this is where Insights gets a little bit different. So I click on the layer name. We now expose all of the variables. So these are all the attributes that sit behind that layer. So now you can see what we were talking about in terms of we actually interrogate the data behind the scenes. We can see whether it's spatial. We can see whether it's categorical. We can see whether it's numeric. And also we can see whether it's temporal. If we brought in something incorrectly, so imagine we have month, it is a number, but let's say I actually want to work with that as a category, so I want to treat it as a category, you can change that. So you can change that variable there. You also see that we have rate ratio on there. So this is the way that if you want to see a choropleth, you can change it to a rate ratio, and then it will automatically map it as a choropleth. So the reason we don't default that is because if you've got totals, then you will want to see it as a graduated symbol, because we need to take into account the area when we're seeing it as a choropleth. So this is just a little check. If you know that you already have it as a percentage, rate ratio, then you just change that there, and then you will always see it as a choropleth. So if we want to start to work with this data, get an understanding of this data, I've mentioned there's time in here. So it's global terrorism data. Simple question, has it increased over time? So you'll see as I drag the variable of time across, we can see it as a table, a chart, or a map. So I'm going to drop it on a chart. This is the temporal data. So as I've mentioned, it's going to give me a timeline. So now we can see that it has increased over time. Another thing we do with time is we actually break it down into the constituent parts. So in this data set, we just have one field, which is a date field. That's the time. When we brought this in, actually pulled out the information for year, quarter, month, day of week, hour, for all those times when somebody says, yeah, all right, so I can see that on a timeline, but what's the pattern by month? I can answer that question just by dragging that variable. I don't need to add a new field, do a calculate statement to pull out month, day, year. It's just there, it's done for us. That's just one of those convenience things that we're trying to do so that you can just get started with your data. So then we could start to ask other questions like, we're looking at this overall, have they increased over time? Have they changed by region? So dragging that variable across region onto the map, you see we're now visualizing the map by region. So now you're getting the idea of working with the variables. That's what we see on the map. If I drag the same, drag the same variable onto a table, what we've done behind the scenes is calculated the total number of those events, so the total number of global terror attacks by region. So I wanted to understand, I was asking a question of how many there are by region. It's going to give me that count by region. But if I want to understand something like which regions have the worst events, have had the most deadly attacks, in my data set I have the number who've been killed and the number that have been wounded. So the most deadly attacks would be the total number of casualties, that's wounded and killed. So what I'm going to do is go in and we're going to look at the data table, essentially our attribute table. I can add in a field. I'm going to call this casualties. And I can do a calculation on that. So I'm going to do the number killed plus the number wounded. And you see how that's responding to the letters as I type them in. That's now done the calculation for the total number of casualties. And now, attached to my data, I have a new field called casualties. So I could drag this across to my table, and you'll see how that table updated, so that now I have the total number of events and the total number of casualties. I could change the statistics straight away if I want to see the average number of casualties by countries. So you see how quickly we're able to start to ask questions. I want to visualize them on the map. And I want to see the interactivity. That's now pulling out where Australasia is, when those events occurred on my timeline, and the values that I'm seeing on that. If I want to see that timeline broken down by each one of those regions, I can do exactly that. And now we see that timeline broken down by each one of those regions, and we can see over time whether the pattern has changed within each one of those regions.
What do you guys think so far? Starting to make sense? Okay.
All right.
Everyone's nodding their heads.
Okay.
That's a good sign.
Okay. I'll keep going.
Keep going, please.
All right, let's have a look at who's done these horrific attacks then. So I know around here I can see who's responsible. So I'm going to drop that on a chart. So now we're going to get into whether this chart is any good. So obviously we have a lot of different groups involved. Now you won't be able to see out there, but there are a few little bars in there. So this is where the bar graph starts to break down. Too many categories, can't see the information. And this is where the idea that we mentioned earlier about the cards, we can change these visualizations. So these cards aren't just simple visualizations, they're connected to your data, which means you can change from anything. So here you could see I can change this to a map, or I could change it to, let's say, a tree map. Now we can start to see that data a little bit. So whenever you're working with this data, you can think, that's not showing me what I want. Change the visualization. The most amount of data we see is for unknown. So let's filter that data out. And I can do a little search. Remove the unknown. Now we can see where there's been the most number of events. And you can see on this graph, everything within Insights, we can touch it, we can change it. So I can change directly on the graph there, instead of the number of events, the number of people who've been killed. Now we can see that there's 3 groups, ISIL, the Taliban, and Boko Haram have been responsible for the most number of deaths. So let's drill down into Boko Haram. I want to take those events. See, I've got the interactions, so I've selected the group I want, I've selected Boko Haram. Now I want all of those events that were highlighted on my map. I've dragged them to a new map. That's it. So essentially, I've now filtered down into the analysis I want to do, but I've done everything visually. I'm just exploring that data. I'm not getting out of my analysis, and it's helping me to answer my questions. So I'm going to move that data set I've just created to a new page. So I've just dragged that across. Let's look at the total number of casualties on a map. Now we want to explore what kinds of things are happening by each of the regions. So I've got the regions here. I've got the year. And we're looking at casualties. So now let's have a look at one of these heat charts. So now you're seeing the total number of casualties by each one of the regions for each one of the years that we have data for. So now you can see how that frequency is increasing. So this is a lot of information we're pulling out here. You see the areas where we don't have data, where we're missing data. We're seeing the locations where things have got worse, and pretty much we can see every location things have got worse. And of course we have that interactivity that I can drill down and see where they are. If I wanted to explore the same information by month, let's say, let's look at the number of casualties by month, and let's have a look at it on a data clock. So now we're seeing the same sort of thing. So now we're looking at the pattern by year, by month, by location, to see how many casualties have been involved. So let's take it down to seeing what type of attacks have been occurring. So we look at the type of attacks, and let's also look at who's been targeted. So I'm clicking on the 2 pieces of information I'm interested in, 2 categorical variables. So I'm going to use a chord diagram there to understand what's been happening between these targets and attack types. So if we take something like assassination, if I click on the arc of this chord diagram, we can see, and this, remember, this has been done all calculated behind the scenes, we can see that the number of events is largest against government officials. So now we know that the government officials are the ones that have the most amount of assassinations. Or we could flip the question around. If I work for the government, what's most likely to happen to me? We already know assassination is quite large, but in fact we see we're more likely to be a victim of armed assault. So you can see how we're pulling out of this information, and all these counts that have been done behind the scenes, these calculations between these 2 variables. We see that private citizens are the ones who've been attacked the most, and obviously we're seeing where, we're seeing when, all of that information. So this is kind of exploring it visually. Imagine if we actually want to explore this. Let's take the attack type. We want to explore this using some spatial analysis. So I'm going to bring in some data for Nigeria. I'm going to bring in the government areas. And what I'm going to do is aggregate up those points into my government areas just by dragging that layer onto that map card. So you see when I did that, I'm going to back that up because I did it quite fast. So I just drag that data set across. You see, as it comes across onto the card, I could add it as a new layer, I could filter by the area, or I can aggregate into those. I can do any kind of statistics, and that's now aggregated to give me the sum of casualties by each of those locations.
Now, come on, that was cool. Right? Spatial aggregation, drag drop. And she even undid it and redid it in the same time frame.
So now we could look at the total population against the total fatalities. And you all know what that's going to give us, 2 numeric variables, a scatter plot. Now we've got quite a large range of data here. We've got some very small villages, some very large cities. This scatter plot's not really showing me that relationship. There's an easy way to fix that. I hover over on the axis, I can log that axis, same for this one. Now I've got a log of my scatter plot. Now I can see if there's a relationship. Statistics can be found just here. I barely need to press it. There's clearly no relationship. But you can see whether there's a relationship in your data just by clicking on it. And this is going to allow us to explore this data a little bit more. You would expect there to be more fatalities where we have a higher population. That's not what we're seeing in this data. So that tells me there's something going on. There's some targeting going on. We could, of course, select out different areas, explore those ones where they're not meeting that, and then kind of drill down into that data to try and understand what exactly is happening at those locations. So I've been doing this live. You will now see, if I flip to the analysis view, everything I've done has been recorded. There's the model. We can update this model. I could refresh the data. So imagine if you're connected to your database, the data's changing. I could refresh that. It will auto rerun that analysis. I could share that model back out to my portal. Anyone else could bring that model back in and run that analysis. Or I could share my page out and they'd be able to see the results that I've done. They will also have the interactivity, but they won't be able to change any of the results that I have. Let's flip back to you.
Bravo. Now, come on. That was... I have this new saying, don't underestimate the power of simple.
Are you saying I'm simple?
No. Yeah. Oy. This is where I get in trouble. Right? No, in all sincerity, it looks simple. It doesn't have a lot of menus, toolbars, fancy-dancy anything. It just lets you start working with the data and start drilling into the things that are most interesting to you. In other words, technology doesn't get in your way. That is what I mean by don't underestimate the power of simple.
I'm just teasing.
I know. But they don't.
No.
Just kidding. All right, so how does it actually do that? You got to ask yourself, how does it do that, right? I can give you the party line. It's all ArcGIS. It's all great. Mm-hmm. But it's actually more than that. We do make use of the ArcGIS Enterprise. Actually built in. Our first focus was on premises, since that's where the majority of everyone's data still is. So we wanted to start with on premises. So we do make use of the ArcGIS Enterprise. However, that's only where it begins. Really, we actually... Let me ask, you guys are familiar with ArcGIS apps in general, right? They're pretty much heavyweight JavaScript clients talking a lot of REST calls back and forth, making use of REST services. Well, Insights kind of, sort of does that. We actually have this thing called the Insights Application Service, and that's the only service that Insights knows how to talk to. That application service is more of a coordination facility, an orchestration style engine that we built into the ArcGIS Enterprise. And all it knows how to deal with, and I'm going to geek out on you here, process chains. The client's smart enough to say this drag and drop operation uses this data, requires this functionality on the back end, and I expect some kind of a result. Here's the handle for me. And it sends that on up. The Insights Application Service says, thank you, takes to work, tears it apart, sends it off to its constituent components, pulls it all back together again, and sends up the response. So it's really a full stack app. It's a pretty face though. The client's a pretty face. The server itself not only has the Insights application service, but we added a new capability called the analytic data service. You're familiar with query layers, right? This is query layers on steroids. This enables us to work directly with native data sources in the language that they speak. So if I'm talking a SQL Server, I'm talking SQL Server specific SQL to get the most out of that engine. If I'm talking to HANA, I'm sending down HANA specific language so that I can get the most out of HANA. Yes, the intelligence is sent down to the data as opposed to the data being sucked into the application space to process all the information. So we are trying to move all the intelligence as close to the data as is possible. So anytime we work with the back end, that's what we're doing. Yes, we also evolved the relational data store with an Insights schema. So every time you create a workbook behind the scenes, we're actually creating a workspace. That workspace is where all the items are contained. So all those extra data sets that are being created on the fly, you won't see them in your portal. They're only available in your workbook because sometimes they're just throwaway data sets. But if they result in something, then you share that data, then we'll take it out of that workspace in the data store in the workbook area, and then we'll create a true portal item for you. So we try to contain your analysis. So let's face it, when you're trying to understand the data, there's a lot of stuff happening and you don't want to clutter your portal. So that's pretty much the entire stack there. It is a full stack system. It does have a lot of moving parts, but in fact, it's easy to install. Once ArcGIS Enterprise is installed, you install the Insights bits. It overlays into the correct areas. If it's a single machine, one time. If it's distributed installation, you have to deploy it in a distributed pattern, as you would imagine. So that's the magic. There's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes to keep that front-facing analytic process as simple as possible so you can do your work. All right, the next question was, okay, where is it going? And will it be around? Yeah, it's going to be around, okay?
Depends if
I'm on the record, they're recording me. Yes, it's going to be around. Should we get into it? I'll just take this one. You've been doing a lot of talking. The roadmap. We released this first December 2016. Since then, we've had 4 releases. The team is working really hard and fast, trying to incrementally improve the feature set, the capabilities itself, performance. Every release has improved performance. Every release has improved quality. We want to make sure that well, let's face it, it's analytics. If we give you the wrong answer, you make the wrong decision, that's a bad thing. We're not going to do that. So every release is designed to make everything better, improving things based on, well, let's call it what it is, a crawl, walk, and run approach. Through our process of listen, learn, and observe, we take in all the information, we digest it, we bat it around a little bit, we understand it at the deepest level. Basically, we tear it apart into its smallest parts. Then we figure out how to put it back together again in this type of an experience, and then we deliver it. But then we phase it in so as not to boil the ocean. That's not what we're going to do here. So if you think about it, 80% of the world uses 20% of the functionality. We're going to focus on that 21st. That's what we did with version 1.0. And we've been evolving it ever since based on the needs of the user community and where analytics is needing to go that combines both spatial and data together in one place. So we're going to continue evolving that. As you see, every couple of months we're delivering some new stuff. The analysis development plan. Linda, I'm going to let you take this slide specifically.
Okay. All right. Good job I was listening. So as the idea in terms of how we're evolving this is we started with the idea of, well, what do you do when you start analysis? The first thing you have to do is understand that data. So the crucial thing is for us to provide you with all the tools that allow you to describe that data. So that maybe, like I've already mentioned about the histograms, understanding whether it's normally distributed, it could be as simple as just knowing how many you have. So that was the first thing that we wanted to do, to put in as many descriptive tools as we could, both spatially and non-spatially. We don't always want to have to extract our data, send it down to Excel or something to get a simple calculation, and then do it spatially to get the calculation there. So to be able to do it in one place. As we move forward, then we're going to actually move out of sort of descriptive statistics and into more inferential statistics. So we're going to introduce things like regression. So we're going towards more predictive analysis, but we will be keeping it in this vein of simple. So as long as it's something we can introduce simply, we can hide the complexity without making it something black box. That's not what it's about. It's your data. I worked as an analyst for a long time, so you'll vouch for me on this one. I always fight it's their data. They've got to be allowed to control it.
And boy, does she fight.
But so that's where we're going. We're moving into a little bit more advanced analysis, inferential statistics, but we will keep it simple. It will be something that won't be in your face, but you will have as much control as we can give you.
Yeah, and just to add to what Linda pointed out, you see a couple of points on there, predictive, machine learning. Those are, you can, if you take away all the buzzwords from anything, it's about analysis. And we need to take this product and the concept of both spatial and other kinds of analysis forward, regardless of where it lands. So we're going to take advantage of all the technology as it comes out. So as things evolve, we're going to be getting into it. And yeah, I know about predictive analytics and machine learning and cognitive intelligence and all this other stuff. Guess what? We're going to make it practical before we just throw out technology. Yeah. So it'll be a practical approach to implementation of all these modern things within Insights, as opposed to, oh yeah, figure out how to code it and get it in, it'll just work. Not going to do it. So we're going to take this over time, but more importantly, again, listen, learn, and observe. Your feedback matters. The agility of the team is really simple. We focus on the current release. That's the only thing that's in stone. We have a plan, we have an idea of what we want to do, but that we're so agile that based on the feedback we get, we may reprioritize that and move things up or back, depending on what we're getting from the field. So as you begin using this and you want something, or you're missing something, or something's just not the way you need it to be, get that information back to us and we will reprioritize and adjust. Now, how many folks want it in ArcGIS Online? And I figured the hands would start going up.
I thought it was going to be no.
I thought I was like, okay, great, no work to do. Yeah. It is an active project right now. Like I said, we focused originally on premises because that's where a lot of our users' data was. We wanted to make sure that we accommodated the immediate need, but we know that this needs to move into a SaaS. As a matter of fact, everything that you saw Linda do was based on an Azure VM. So I know Microsoft's in the room, they should be happy. But definitely it's based on an Azure VM. So it was Insights as a service. That's one of the offerings. So we are working towards it. We have a timeline right now. It's based on the second half of this year. Hopefully our target is by the end of this year. But like I tell Jack, and Jack asks me every week, and I keep telling him the same thing. It's a work in progress. I am not committing to a timeline until we're sure that it's right. The last thing I want to do is deliver something less than what's already out there. Don't want any more of those questions that say, yeah, I use it, but guess what? Put it online and it just no longer works for me. Nah, I don't want to answer that question. So we're going to take it right. We're going to do it right the first time and not do it again the second time. So this is a work in progress. The target timeline is by the end of the year in the December release, hopefully. But we'll see where it goes. I'll have more details in August, and I'm sure once I tell Jack, it'll go out to the world. Yes, someone here knows Jack. I heard that giggle. So that's essentially it. We have some additional things going on with Insights. A real big shout out to our product marketing team. They actually set up this little mixer for us. The entire Insights team, the folks that are here. We're going to be at this place called the Shout House down in the Gas Lamp. It's the piano bar or something at 7:30. So if you want to meet the team, you want to learn more, we'll be there. It's a great place, piano bar kind of a thing. But we also have advanced sessions. So now that you've seen the introduction, the advanced is different. It's totally different. We actually get more into the analysis workflow. We actually drill into it. We actually understand what's going on behind the scenes. So with that, don't forget our survey. Our Our teams will hate me if I don't ask you to please fill out the surveys. And thank you very much. We have time for some questions if you have some. We have, that gentleman was first. Did you hear him?
Yes, scatter plot matrix.
Repeat the question.
Yes, the question was, are we going to put in a scatter plot matrix? Yes. I want to do small multiples of lots of different things, so I'm trying to find a way of us doing that, but yes is the answer. What was the other one you asked for?
Parallel coordinate. So the question was
parallel coordinates plots. Maybe. Maybe.
I think this gentleman had a question first.
What's the learning path to become proficient?
That's a very good question. The question was, what is the learning path in becoming proficient with insights? That's a variable answer. If you're a GIS user, we found that it takes less than an hour to get proficient with this thing. A couple of hours, you're pretty much running. And that's based on a number of events that have taken place with our industry teams with current GIS professionals. If you're a non-GIS professional, we found that people are more comfortable in this and they're pretty much up and running within 15 to 30 minutes.
And it does depend when you say.
Don't ask me. This is the information that we've got.
I would say the more advanced you are as an analyst, the more you will get out of it.
Yeah.
But you can get up and running quickly.
So but it all depends on the skill set of the user. I think that's really what it comes down to. It's just that the GIS professional has been trained using ArcGIS, where you go to the toolbox and select a tool. Yeah, I know, I get that. But it's just one of those things, right? Different way of thinking.
You were bringing data from data sets. I noticed that all the field names are there. Does it bring in the aliases? Can you see the alias names on the tables and field names?
So we show.
Repeat the question.
GIS people, we might know names from.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is, does it bring in the aliases? Yes, we work with the alias names. That's the one we actually pull in. You can also rename any of the layers, the layer name or the fields when you're in there as well. We'll work with that.
Yeah, two things, population pyramids and things like that. The second thing is,
Yep.
I would love to be able to, so I'd say I have a scatter plot and I'm using circles and I've got 2 dimensions. I would love to then say, take color and put that as a 3rd dimension. And then, another quality of the circle is a 4th dimension.
Yep.
Like that, and add those in. Can you, and set up the ranges, will you be able to do things like
So you can already do 4 variables on the scatter plot. So we can do the 2 values, we can bring in another one that varies the size, and we can do the color. So we have those 4 variables. In terms of the pyramids, again, that has been one that's requested a lot, so that will come in. At the moment, we'd have the bar graphs, that's the only way at the moment, but they probably will come, the pyramids, yeah.
data that doesn't have any spatial references in it? Does this allow you to actually link data to a spatial map? Is there a tool in there that
So the question is, if I have non-spatial information, I bring it in, can I geo-enable that table to make it spatial table? Yes. And we have a myriad of ways of doing that. I do recommend you go to the advanced session. We have a great demonstration that shows that. Also, stop by the island. They have some data sets that are Excel data sets that they bring in and they geo-enable on the fly. Okay.
can you print a page as a report?
That infamous report question. I knew that was going to come up. Should have stopped while we were behind.
Yep.
The question was, can I print a page as a report? A page right now is being shared as a portal item, and that portal item can be seen in a read-only view. If you want to print it, there's only printing available as part of the web browser. We haven't been able to take it the next level yet. We do recognize that what I call the category of presentation is still a little weak inside of Insights, but we're only 6 months old. We've got a little ways to go, but yes, that is something that is important, and we will be getting there. Okay, I think that young lady over there.
If you're pulling data via a database connection, you are actually pulling that data in, and that's not a read-only connection, right? Are you writing that data within the database too, when you're making some columns and things like
Okay, so when we're connecting to a database, it is read-only. Everything we do is read-only. So when we're doing a calculation, for example, and it appears to be a part of the table, it's not. Actually, what we're doing, we're creating another table in our hosted store, and we're actually doing a join to that table. So at the moment, we don't do any writing to your data, so yeah.
Yeah, but to take that a step further, we do have plans right now because we have a lot of questions. Hey, if I have read-write access, make use of my database the way it is. So if you've connected as a read-write going forward, we have a plan right now to enable that directly within your database of choice. So it would be more of a user-managed data store instead of an Esri-managed data store. So that is on the horizon. We are heading that way. That'll only give us even more performance. So yeah, that's coming.
You can set up a page and maybe have X number of cards on that page and save that as a template and then be able to access the same tables but for like a different client.
So the question was, I want to set up a page with all the cards and data. I want to save that page as a template and allow other clients to bring that in.
Right, be able to connect to their data and have it populate again.
That's a very good question. We haven't really thought that one through.
Well, you can share a workbook as long as they have the analysis and they can duplicate that workbook.
That's true. Yep.
So you would be able to do that because then they would be connected to the same data sets. So yeah, there are various ways you can do it. You could also share the data back to the portal. You could share the models and you can share the page. So depending on the type of access you want them to have, there's certainly ways of doing it.
Yeah, I think we can do better though. I think we can do better.
You've just given me another job.
No. We'll make Anatoly do it.
Okay.
No, it's a good question. Thank you. Back there in the back. Yes.
I have a question. I know when you share the workbook, right? You can share it out to the portal or to somebody else. That becomes static, doesn't it?
So the question is, if I share my workbook, does it become static from that point on?
No. All the interactivity that you see, they will see when you share that. So the crucial thing about when we're doing sharing is we actually make a static copy of that data. We only copy across just the variables that you need to maintain that interactivity.
But say, for instance, if there's more data that gets added on, is there a button that can automatically refresh it instead of having to, or not a button, but like when you open up that workbook, is there a way that you can automatically refresh the data?
So you can, the question is, can you automatically refresh it? At the moment we have a manual refresh. So there is. We have like just a little icon. You can press on that and it will go back to the data source and rerun that analysis. So yes, you can do it. We haven't yet allowed a way to automate that process. Some people say we want to auto-update every hour or every day or something. We don't have that automation, but we do have it, so it's a manual refresh at the moment.
And the operative word is yet. That's coming. Okay, so one last question and then we're going to go. I'm sorry, he had his hand up first, but we'll be here right afterwards as well. Go ahead, sir.
My question is similar to hers, but it's not quite clear to me. So if you share a card or a book, not through the ArcGIS portal and you want to publish that in a public website, first, can you do that? And second, if so, would that be reading dynamically the data? So as she said, if the data changes, those changes would be reflected?
So the question is, if I share this publicly, is the data still linked back to the live data, or is it a snapshot in time based on the results that I want to share? The answer is it's a snapshot in time based on the results that you shared. Could you imagine going into a boardroom, say, here's your answers. Then they look at it 5 seconds later and it changes out on you. It's no longer what you presented, no longer what you're trying to sell. So it's based on a snapshot in time today. We're going to enable more options in the future to say whether you want it dynamic or static. But right now it's based on a snapshot in time, since that was the primary requirement going forward with that sharing piece right now.
The other question was the iframe.
The iframe, publicly sharing it on a website, yes. So a page itself when you share a page, it becomes a portal item. That portal item itself can be embeddable within an iframe from which you can put into a story map, share publicly, or any other website that you want, a SharePoint site or whatever. So yes, you can do that as well.
But you have to make sure you share the data. A lot of people say it doesn't work. Data must be shared as well.
Right. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time. And don't forget the advanced session and the social tonight. Thank you.